Talking About Horses, bringing you closer to some of the best horsemen in the world for tips, insights, and stories. Listen at home, at work, in the car, or in the saddle. This is Talking About Horses. Here's your host, Patrick King.
Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 38 of Talking About Horses. Today I'm pleased to be again joined by my friend Dr. Paul Haefner. Dr. Haefner is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 25 years of professional experience. In addition to his PhD in clinical psychology, Dr. Haefner is a certified clinical hypnotherapist and a certified master practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. In his practice, he provides sports psychology consultation, equine-facilitated personal and professional development, and a broad range of other therapeutic services to adults, adolescents, and children. He supported the development of research on the horse-human relationships through his role as Research Committee Chair for the Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association, and currently serves as a member of the Board of Directors of the Horses and Humans Research Foundation. An avid equestrian since his childhood, Dr. Haefner's combined his love for horses and lifelong equestrian experience with his knowledge of human psychology in order to help people raise their level of performance and overcome any of the challenges that arise when participating in equestrian sport. At Riding Far LLC, Dr. Haefner helps equestrians address issues such as performance pressure, fear, anxiety, motivation, goal setting, focus, and concentration. In addition to his work with individuals, Dr. Haefner presents seminars and clinics customized to the needs of specific groups of riders from a wide range of equestrian disciplines. Okay, now I'm done feeling weird and calling you Dr. Haefner. So, Paul, thanks for joining us again for Talking About Horses.
Thank you for having me. It's great to join you tonight.
Awesome. So, in your bio, we talked about the goal setting, that you help equestrians address goal setting. And that's what we said we wanted to talk about tonight, with the idea of not only goal setting, but also attainment of those goals. And I think it's a perfect way to wrap up the year and to give folks things to think about for the new year, because we know that, the all-important time of New Year's resolutions is coming up, and those things, that list that we put on the refrigerator that ends up by week 2 of the new year covered by permission slips and grocery lists and coupons and all that other stuff, right?
Right, yeah.
So,
and what I would toss in with that is that the idea. A lot of times when we talk about goals, people feel like, sometimes people feel pressured. They feel pressured to have New Year's resolutions. They feel pressured to have goals. And as we'll talk about tonight, goals are really, really helpful if you want to get somewhere. But there is also nothing wrong with, not having, this list of goals or list of resolutions. What really matters is, are you satisfied with where you're at and how you're moving along? And if you find yourself wanting to get somewhere, then the goals are really going to help you focus your efforts, and they're going to help you move forward and get you where you want to be.
I like that. Are you happy where you're at? That's good. So we don't have to write them all down, right? We don't have to go into that.
And a lot of times, and this is another one of the things that I've observed in people over time is there are a lot of people that have very specific goals for themselves, but they sort of carry them with them, rather than being the people that talk about them and write them down and sort them out and make action plans and stuff like that. There are some people who can sort of carry those goals implicitly in what they do and move forward. A lot of times, it's like so many other things where certain people have certain kind of talents. It's not something that in general people have. And one of the places where the whole goal thing comes into play is when people are asking for help in learning and building skill and getting where they want to be. So within the horse world, a lot of times that's between trainers and riders. And when you involve someone else in the equation, then the explicit goal setting really becomes more and more important.
Gotcha. So when we talk about doing that explicit goal setting, what are we talking about? How do we do that?
Well, there's a couple things that are helpful to know before you get down to the specifics of that.
Okay.
And one of the things to just be aware of is that goals do not exist in isolation of other things. So I know the last time we talked about a couple of the different things which I think are really important for people to reflect on. The things like what are their motivations, what resources do they have, what kind of risks they're willing to take, and what kind of relationships they have around them would be the other things. And part of the reason that those things are important is that in the process of goal setting, you can formulate the most amazing, pristine, and well-constructed goals. But if you're not particularly motivated, if they don't connect to your motivations, or if you have goals that you don't have the resources to attain, then you end up in situations where you just end up being frustrated, and or demoralized, and or in worst case scenario, a case where you may be overfaced and injured. So it's important to keep that larger context in mind. All of that said, there's another thing to be thoughtful about, which is that when you start getting down to the business and getting down to brass tacks of putting together your goals, one of the things that a lot of people notice, and we'll talk about this as we go through, is that the things that I'm going to present a straightforward way of thinking about making well-formed goals. But as you start doing it, you'll notice that even these very clear, specific things are a little slippery. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go along. So just to be aware that something that really sounds straightforward and simple is more complex and a little bit more slippery than it may seem right up front. So, but given that, one of the most time-honored acronyms around goals is the acronym of SMART goals. And that actually, the acronym, it comes, my understanding is it comes from the business world, and it really has been pervasively adopted in pretty much any situation where where goal setting is important. And if you look around, you'll find some variations in terms of the language that's used for each of the letters. Okay. But I'll walk through them in the way that I use them and understand them. Okay. And that is that well-formed goals are specific. And what we mean by specific is that it's specific versus general. So you want to get down to thinking about, with an appropriate degree of specificity, what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish. Then we want goals to be measurable. So we have to have some way of some metric, some way of measuring where we are towards the attainment of those goals. And the challenge there is that when we don't have something that we're measuring them by, then we're relying on our perceptions, and people are terrible at judging their own progress, mostly because when something bad happens, it just sort of colors the whole screen. We throw up our hands and we say, "Oh my God, I haven't made any progress." Right. And without those specifics, right, we won't be able to sort of be we aren't very accurate, and we won't be able to assess how far we've come or what more we have to do. Goals need to be attainable. They need to be things that we can actually achieve, attainable or achievable. And that's the idea of setting the bar at an appropriate height.
Okay.
Right? And if it's set too high, then we run into a situation where we can fail and then ultimately be demoralized. If you're setting goals that are unattainable or unachievable, it's like banging your head against the wall. And as people get themselves in trouble that way. R is for relevant. So a lot of times, and it's really, sometimes this is really straightforward, that in the sense that you can see with face value, what we call face value, you look at a goal and you say, this has nothing to do with, my horsemanship journey.
Oh, okay.
So, my goal is to get a new bathing suit, right? And, what does that have to do with my horsemanship journey?
Right.
So there are other times, however, and these are where things can get pretty subtle, is where we think that we are on a pathway and we have a goal for ourselves. And what we didn't realize is that, it's taking us in the wrong direction. And a lot of times that has to do with, someone like yourself or people that are working with us to help us understand sequence. A lot of times things get out of sequence, so I might be working on something, but it's not particularly relevant to where I'm going or what I want to do.
Gotcha.
And it might be a very fine thing to do. So, for example, there may be certain types of ground activities or skills that I really enjoy, and maybe I want to work at Liberty or things of that sort. And, that may be a fine thing to do, but if what I'm trying to do is, advance my horse in working towards passage, the Liberty work right up front may not be the most efficient strategy to get there. There may be a place and time for that, but sometime later on down the road. And then finally, time-bound. And goals, part of the reason that we say things are time-bound is people often, most of us, I would include myself in this category, tend to be procrastinators. And especially in today's society where things are so busy and it got so many irons in the fire and so many things going on, that without the idea of having a time that I'm shooting for, it's very easy to say, oh, well, I'll just do that next week, and then next week becomes next month. I don't know about you, but it seems like 2 months can go by, and it's like a flash, like a day.
Absolutely. What's that old line? The road to someday leads to the town called, the road to someday leads to the town called nowhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that so those are the elements of the well-formed goal.
Okay. And so just to reiterate those for our listeners, so your well-formed goals are SMART goals. They're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I mentioned before about how things can get slippery. It's really easy to just, a very simple example would be to take the specific quality of a goal. And, the question is, how specific is specific, right? So, someone could say, well, I want to, let's say you have a jumper rider and they want to advance to the, meter 10 class, right? Well, is that specific enough, right? And you can get more specific. You can break that down into, well, what are the skills that I need in order to get to that class? And you can break that down again further and say, well, what are the fitness goals that I have for my horse, and what are the exercises that I'm going to use for that? And you can work your way down the chain and get more and more and more specific.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So that's always one of the challenges with goals, is that when people are trying to struggle to make their goals specific, and it's similar with the other qualities and aspects of it, how do you do that? And that comes across as well, because we haven't talked about this yet. We talk about more about this when we get to talking about how do we attain our goals. When you take a goal and then you start breaking it down into pieces where you can take steps, and you want to chunk it down and take small steps. Well, how small should each step be, right? And there's a lot of that is going to be subjective for the individual. So we say that we have these guidelines, but we need to know that they can be hard to apply, that there's some judgment involved, and that's where discussion with your trainer and kind of sorting this stuff through and really thinking through it carefully can really be helpful. Rather than just slapping a few things down on the paper and going with it.
Okay. So is there a specific process that you go through, or that you would recommend that our riders go through? Like you said, talking to your trainer versus just slapping it down on a paper. Is there more a specific process that you've seen as being really helpful?
Well, so there's one other piece that I think is helpful to throw in terms of goals, and then I'll share with you just a sort of a general sense of what I think is a helpful process.
Okay.
And that is that, excuse me, the other thing about goals is that a lot of times when we talk about goals, we kind of simplify it into this one big goal. So you talk about New Year's resolutions. Well, I'm going to lose weight.
Right.
Or I'm going to eat better, or I'm going to be more fit, right?
Right.
And they throw.
Damn it! Were you reading my list, Paul? What the hell? Jeez, man. We said we weren't going to talk about my goals, and no, I'm kidding. Kidding a little.
Well, good luck in Portugal.
Right, exactly. I'm going to eat better. Pastries.
So when we look at things generally, a lot of times what we forget is there are many different dimensions or aspects in which goals are going to be helpful. So the idea, when you start looking at horse-rider relationships, and kind of break those things down into dimensions. Well, the easiest division, of course, is that there's a horse and there's a rider. Right? So when you're looking at goals, you can look at the goals you have as a team, right, as a horse-rider combination or a horse-rider team or partnership in whatever language feels right to you. And then, obviously the fact that it is a partnership or a team means that there's two individuals involved. So then it makes sense to break it down a bit and think about having multiple goals. So there would be goals that you might have for your partnership, goals that you would have for yourself, and goals that you might have or set for your horse.
Gotcha. Because you're going to each have to bring your own goals, your own skills to the table in order to attain those goals.
Right, okay. Exactly. And then, of course, the next step down is to say, okay, well, if I'm just looking at myself, or I'm looking at my horse, there are dimensions that you may want to break things down a little bit further. So I know for me, when I'm thinking about, okay, well, where do I need to go? I know one thing that I need to do, given my advancing age, is I have to pay a lot of attention to my fitness and flexibility.
Okay.
A lot more than I needed to 30 or 40 years ago. So I'm going to have a fitness goal. And then, you might say, the idea, part of that fitness goal might be that, to have a nutrition goal, because I know, for example, that, these are the ways you begin to appreciate how everything's connected together. I know that what I put in my body is going to affect how my body functions as a physical entity, right?
Okay, sure.
But it's also going to affect me in terms of how I function emotionally, and it's also going to affect how I function intellectually.
Okay.
So I may have a physical goal, I may have a nutritional goal, I might have educational goals, and those educational goals might be sort of, more informationally oriented, or might be skill development, maybe things that I want to learn about and work on, things like building more expertise in the application of my aids, or being able to develop my seat, or do things around my hands, or all those, just being able to deal with or be more coordinated with equipment. So there's all kinds of educational goals that I may have for myself.
Okay.
And there might be also emotional goals. So let's say I tend to be excitable, and I tend to get frustrated easily. So what I might then be doing is finding ways to manage my emotional energy better.
Okay.
Right? Or maybe I'm someone who's like really laid back. And one of the things that would really help is if my horse had more energy from me in terms of directing or connecting in the interaction. So then I might have a goal, an emotional goal of, raising my energy.
Okay.
How do I engage my energy? Or someone might have a goal of emotional flexibility, of being able to get their energy way up and then back down with it, that kind of stuff, managing anxiety, all these sorts of things. So all of that is to say, you have this goal setting, and I'll get back to your question. The goal setting is, when you're thinking about it, you want to think about it in terms of these dimensions. Let's have goals for me and my equine partner. Let's have goals for me, goals for my partner. Let's think about these different pieces of the puzzle, and maybe perhaps set up some goals that address a number of these different things.
Okay.
So then you get back to this idea of, well, what's the process? And I would suggest to people that they do. I'm gonna walk you through what I think is really helpful, and I'm gonna suggest to people that they do this twice a year.
Okay.
Okay. So in the process, the first thing is to sit down and look at the big picture of things. Right? And, sort of going back to the last time, checking in, what is the same, what has increased and what has decreased.
Okay.
What has shifted, what has changed from previous years, or previous time, and I take a look at your motivations. How are you feeling like this? How hot is the fire in your belly for different things? And again, it's all connected to all the stuff we're talking about. It's not just fire in your belly, but it's fire in your belly for, one activity or another activity or things of that sort. What are your motivations for your riding? What are your motivations for being with horses? What are motivations for the disciplines you're choosing? That kind of stuff. And then, looking at the other things. So looking at, hey, where am I with my resources? And then you're going to talk about or explore or reflect on things like your physical resources. I broke my leg last year, or I had a back injury and now my physical resources have changed. Or, man, I invested and I'm in the best shape of my life.
Okay.
I have more physical resources than I've ever had in my life, and it can change in either direction. Time. Did I get a new job and I have less time?
Okay.
Or did I have a child, or those kinds of things? Or did I retire and now I have a lot more time? Or did I change? Have my circumstances changed? So, looking at what are the different kinds of resources you have? Time, physical resources, finances. What horses do you have to work with?
Okay.
All of these sorts of things are really important to kind of reflect on and take into account. Is there something, that's changed in your life in terms of, your risk assessment or willingness to take risk? We talked about that too, about, is someone counting on you now? Do you have an elderly parent that is counting on you, or maybe you have a child or things like that? And has your social situation changed? Do you have the same kinds of supports, or maybe you have more supports?
Okay.
People that can support you and also challenge you, in that. So it's the first thing I do is take that big picture look and then start thinking about, where would I like to go?
Okay.
And that's where then the goal setting comes in. And I've heard this talked about in a lot of different ways. What I suggest to people is to just start with an aspiration, and a goal that's way out there. I mean, big picture. What do they dream about? Because that's going to help support your interest in something. What are your dreams about what you want to do with horses, right? And it's in those dreams help then guide your setting up goals in terms of moving in that direction. The idea of an aspirational goal is not necessarily something that you're going to accomplish in the next 3 months, 6 months.
Okay.
But it does provide sort of direction and the ways that you want to move forward. Right?
So that's your castle in the clouds, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. And then then once you have that at the top of the page, then you just start asking questions like, okay, so if I want to get there, what are some of the things that I want to do, right, or that I need to do or I need to accomplish on the pathway to that, right?
Okay.
And you might have more than one. So lately I've been thinking a lot about this. I have a change in my situation where I have more time. Okay, so for those, some of your listeners may know my situation, but for the last 4 years I've been teaching, and then I resigned in June. So now I'm doing practice full time, which actually affords me more time to ride. right?
Right.
And then I say, okay, so I got this. What do I want to do? And I have a couple of things. I have a goal, which is something I know I love to do, which is fox hunt. And I just really, really, really love fox hunting. I also have a more generalized kind of goal about advancing my horsemanship. And in this idea, it's a really global idea about being the best horseman I can be. But I have some models in my head for that.
Okay.
So some of these figures for me that stand out there, are people like Philippe Carl, and I look at it. I just watched a video of him today, and it's just like, oh my God, if I could take one or two or three steps towards that, that would be like totally awesome, right? So I start with that big picture stuff, and I say, well, what do I need to do to get there? Well, if I'm going to fox hunt, I got to jump.
Yeah, sure, right.
Right? And I realized, well, I haven't been over a jump in like 4 or 5 years, so I guess I ought to, get back and get those skills tuned up. So I started taking jumping lessons, and right now I don't have a personal resource. I don't have a personal horse I could jump at those heights, so I have to find people who have horses I can ride. And I know that I don't just want to be able to ride one horse, right? So then my goal is to build into that, to say, okay, well, I'm going to start on one horse, but I'm going to seek out someone that has, 3 or 4 or 5 different horses with different kinds of rides that I can advance my horsemanship, not just jump one horse, but I can really get a good feel for my ability to adapt and be flexible in a lot of different situations, right? So that's the jumping end, and then there's the classical dressage end, which puts me in clinics with you, and I seek out other opportunities to learn from people when I can along the way, and then I have my whole agenda and how I'm going to educate myself and take steps moving forward. So you start with that aspirational goal, and then you start taking and say, well, okay, so what are the steps on the way there? And then once you have those sub-goals, then you start asking, well, what's the step that I need to take to get there?
Okay.
And then what's the step that I need to take there, to get there? So you're breaking it down into steps, ultimately, until you're on the level where I know what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Gotcha. Okay.
And generally where things fall down is that as you're sitting down there sort of setting out your goals, a lot of times people just get the big goal up there, and they don't take those extra steps.
Right.
In figuring it out. And what often ends up happening, which is why I recommend that people do, if they're working with a trainer consistently, I recommend that people find the time to sit down and do this with their trainer.
Yeah.
Because the trainer may have all of these steps in their head, or may know that they might have to shift gears midstream based on what's going on. But if you as the rider don't know what those things are, then you're really going to impair your learning process, and you're going to slow down your progress towards those goals, because you're not going in knowing what you're focused on. You don't know what you're trying to accomplish. And we can talk about, when we're talking about goal attainment, people don't know what to rehearse. What are the things that they're really trying to take away and develop in the course of that. So I really recommend that people go through and do that with their trainer, and really ask their trainer, okay, so what are these steps with me? What are the steps with my horse? What if you have a trainer who's actually working with your horse? What are they doing with their horse, and what's the progression, and what's the steps, and help them understand that the scope and sequence of the training process with them, and and what they're trying to accomplish, and what do you need to do for yourself, right? So you start breaking it down, not just in terms of aspirational goal, what do I need to get there, then what do I need to get there, and what do I need to get there, but also breaking it down, what are the different pieces that I have to have goals set for. Right?
Okay.
And it sounds really, really, really complicated, and certainly you could spend several weeks working on your sort of dissertation of my next 6 months goals.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it can be a reasonably efficient process. Excuse me. More time usually goes into doing it the first time. But if this is something that you're coming in, you've already talked through and you've put in the work the first time, then you're coming in at 6 months, and it's an update unless there's been some dramatic change.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Now, do you think that has a lot to do with the big picture, the castle in the sky?
Absolutely. In what sense? I want to make sure
I'm thinking if I go into goal setting, like I've got this wild goal. I think you and I have talked about it. I know it's come up a couple times through these podcasts that we've got the goal of a major international school. Mm-hmm. If I know that that's my castle in the sky, then it would be a lot easier for me to break down those steps and then create those sub-goals. And then in 6 months, I can check in with that and do that again.
Absolutely.
So the big picture final end, having that in mind, because I know there's been times, I'm just thinking on a personal level myself, I know that there's been times in the past where I haven't necessarily had that as a goal. And so then the goal setting I always felt was much more challenging than it is now.
Right. And that's why it's really helpful to have the aspirational goal, because that sort of provides a frame or provides a focus for what you're doing, and even something like deciding if something's relevant.
Sure. Right.
Right, and that I do want to appreciate that there are levels of complexity. So you may set a goal that's not relevant to that aspiration, but maybe you have other things that you want to accomplish in your life, or other things that are meaningful to you. Mm-hmm. And then you just have to look and say, okay, is this irrelevant?
Gotcha.
Or do I just want to appreciate that I have more than one thing that's important to me, and then try to balance the goals, amongst those two things.
Gotcha.
Or 3 things, or 7 things, or 47 things, depending on who you are.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is going to be totally individually dependent, right? On how good we are at juggling, basically.
Right.
If you've got that one goal, or if you've got, like you said, there's 47 different goals.
Well, and it's individual in a lot of different ways, and this is one of the great challenges. It's a challenge for trainers. It's a challenge for riders. Individual differences are really, really important to appreciate, and because people not only differ in terms of their capacity that you're talking about. I mean, there's some people that have, I have some friends that, you being one of them, that have so much energy. You're just doing things, and they can have 5 things or 7 things or 25 things going all at once. Mm-hmm. I also have good friends who, have one focus, and they do better if they're just focused on one thing, and that there's a slower pace, and there's no, it's not like one's better than the other. It's people are different.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And if we're, and there are times, we run into the situation, because I'm suggesting people do things in coordination with their instructors and trainers, we also have to appreciate that there are different instructors and trainers, and that they have their individual differences, and that then, it sort of raises, the question about, match or fit between any individual trainer or instructor and any individual rider. And I deal with, there's a lot of that I deal with. A lot of it actually is resolved quite easily if people can establish lines of communication. It's really interesting to me that people don't talk to each other.
Right.
All kinds of feelings that don't talk to each other. But on the other end, there are some trainers, for example, that can work with a really broad range of students. And there are other trainers who are very clear on what they want to do, and they're looking to work with a very specific kind of student, right? There are people that can work with a broad range of instructors with different styles of temperament, and others that really need a specific kind of temperament. So all of that needs to be taken into account if you're going to be thinking about, how do I maximize the progress towards my goals? So that kind of individuality, and it's part of the reason why this is so complex, and why it's often a really good idea to get some help with it, and because there are all these different aspects to it, and then add on to all of that you're dealing with human beings who are individuals.
Right.
And we haven't even talked about horses.
I was going to say, and horses, right? Exactly. That are also individual beings that have their own issues and challenges and problems and setbacks and thoughts and motivations.
Exactly.
Okay. So I guess that feels to me like that's going to kind of take us into the goal attainment idea. So as far as the goal setting goes, then twice a year we're going to look at the big picture, see kind of what the current state of of our motivation, resources, that sort of thing is, where we want to go. We've got our aspirational goals. We've made our well-formed, smart goals that, again, to review, are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And now on the time-bound thing also, we've broken those down into steps, sub-goals, smaller steps from there, and then ultimately, if we've done our homework, broken it down even into the daily goals, right? The daily practice.
Right. Yep.
So now we're talking about attainment.
Yeah, and that's one of the greatest challenges is it's actually it's easier to make goals than it is to attain them.
Sure, absolutely.
So there's a couple of things, again, to start with some contextual things. One of the really interesting things is what society sort of tells us about people that struggle to attain their goals. Okay, and there's all kinds of judgments that we have about people. And I'm sure that people will recognize, some of these things. So someone who doesn't attain their goals, might be cast as being lazy.
Okay.
Right. Or, lazy, or in a more general sense, we sort of see this as a defect of character. Right. That if you struggle towards your goals, that there's something wrong with you. And it's interestingly enough, then, sort of something that comes from that in a general context. A lot of times when people, are trying to help people with their goals, basically they're saying, okay, well, just be like her, or just be like him, and then you'll be able to attain your goals. So there's this focus on personal inadequacy, character defect, and that solutions that require someone to be other than who they are. It's a really fascinating thing, and none of that is helpful.
I can see where that would be rather demotivating.
Yeah, and it's profoundly common. I mean, I would say it's probably more common than any other way of thinking about it. I mean, I've worked with parents who are worried about their kids in school and their motivation, or kids in terms of, their motivation as riders, and they're good people, and they're really caring people, and just infused in us culturally is this sense, that there's something wrong with somebody. And the reality is that there are very specific things that can help you in taking steps, and it's not about being someone that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would refer people to is it's a great book in many ways, not even because of what it says, but the way that it draws together the wisdom from a lot of different places. It's written by a guy named Sean Young, and it's a book called Stick With It.
Okay.
Okay, and he is a researcher, and he works with people from a lot of different, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of different places in life. He works with businesses, people in business. He works with individuals.
Okay.
He works with athletes. Works with a lot of different people around goal attainment. And I think there's two things which are really helpful, what he says. First of all, not all behaviors are the same. So when we're looking for goal setting, ultimately we're looking at initiating behavior that's going to move us towards our goals. And in wanting to initiate certain behaviors, we also can be aware that there are behaviors that we engage in which may be counter to our achieving our goals.
Okay.
So, the metaphorical snooze button, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How many times have you got, knowing that, you've made this goal to work with, I'll take this personally. I know that my riding time, 3 out of the 5 days a week that I can ride, means I have to get up at 5 in the morning.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And if I get up at 5:30, I can't do it. Right?
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
So, it's that tight in that time. And, how many times is it like you flip over and you just tap the snooze button?
Right.
Right? And then you tap that snooze button again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways to think about it is that I just have this, amazing moral failure in that moment, and that I'm a lazy ass, and I'm just, I'm going to need to struggle to overcome my defects.
Right.
The other way to think about it is that I have a behavior that has certain qualities. And the qualities of this behavior is that I'm aware I'm doing it. I know that it's not what I want to do, but I can't keep myself from doing it.
Okay.
Okay? There are other behaviors, and we'll see this in our riding all the time. Particularly, I think that you and your students would be thinking about these things all the time. And we actually talked about it. This idea of self-awareness being an ongoing process.
Yes.
We engage in automatic behaviors that we're not even conscious of.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And then we have all the other behaviors that, are things that are just, commonly happen, and that, we get distracted by stuff, or we get too busy, or we overplan, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what this guy, Dr. Young, does is he breaks things down into those 3 categories. He calls them A, B, and C behaviors. Okay? Automatic behaviors, which are things that we're unconscious of. B behaviors are what he calls burning behaviors, which I think is particularly clever. These are things we're conscious of but can't stop.
Ah, okay.
Right? And that might be anything, from like hitting the snooze button to knowing you shouldn't like look at your phone first thing in the morning, but you wake up and you pick it up off the bed, or you're checking it 15 times during the day. And certainly more serious things are, things like addictions that fall in that category.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then there are these common behaviors, things you're aware of that, you're things like shifts in motivation or distractions or stuff that come up along the way, things you're aware of and can deal with. And what he says is that these are really, it's important to break things down into different behaviors, because different behaviors require different approaches to help you, shift those behaviors and moving you towards achieving your goals. Okay. And he identifies, I think, so many of these people are amazingly clever. He has another acronym for what he calls the 7 forces for behavioral change. Okay. And I love this, because this is not about, here's 7 very specific things you do and everything will be different. He's talking about, these dimensions or these things that you need to be aware of that impact what you choose to, how you choose to behave, or how you behave when you're working towards your goals. And he uses an acronym of SCIENCE. Okay. And I'm going to walk you through those really briefly. I don't know that we'll have time to talk about each of them, but the first S is first step ladder, and we've talked about that in breaking things down, taking incremental steps. Okay. Right, and then ultimately the thing, the step, you can make bigger or smaller steps, but you can get down to what can I do today, and that you want those steps to be progressive and you want them to be achievable, have all those characteristics of those, those SMART goals, right? The second one is community. Okay. And that community is about providing support, but also providing healthy competition. Okay. People pushing each other, and people also supporting each other.
So kind of the idea of the accountability partner, or somebody you can turn to talk about your goals, or like you talked about your trainer, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I still struggle to find ways to talk about this, because on so many levels, those connections and relationships you have around there are important. Right. And the easiest way to talk about them is about, having, emotional support and having someone to act as an accountability partner and stuff like that. But it's also all the way down to a fundamental basic neurological level, and your willingness to take risk is all related to this kind of connection, community, relationship sort of stuff. So it's really, really, really important.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that goes back to, what we hear about. You are the sum total of the 5 people you hang around the most, right? For exactly that reason.
Absolutely.
Okay. Absolutely. Or you are the average of, rather, the 5 people. Okay.
So we're up to I. I is about importance. So, when you're looking to shift your behavior, you're not going to invest in something unless it's important to you. And that gets back to this idea of the aspirational goals, and this idea of motivation, that's an element that's going to help support and drive behavior and behavior changes. And I'll leave that, have another thought, but that'll come back later. So we have step ladders, community, importance, And then one that I love because it's so connected to the ethos and so much of horsemanship is easy.
Thank goodness. I mean, you're giving me all these lists and all this shit I gotta do, and now finally you come to the easy step. I get to hit the easy button. Is that what you're trying to say? I can hit the easy button on this?
Right. And I was listening to this stuff, and when I heard the easy, it just it came back to me. When I was riding with you, I don't know how many months ago. You said, well, if it's right, it's easy.
Yeah.
And if it's not easy, it's not right.
Right. Yep.
And then all of the old stuff from Ray Hunt. I think he's the one that has the sayings about make the right things easy and the wrong things difficult, that kind of stuff. And this is very simply the same kind of thing, is that you want to take the steps that you want to make, the things that you want to be doing, you want to make them easy for you.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a very convenient example, right? I have been consistently riding 4 or 5 days a week since maybe July.
Okay.
Many days, multiple horses. Now, Justin is getting ready to go to Florida with his girlfriend Danny. Danny's moving down to show at Ocala. She had a number of horses that she needed to leg up before and keep fit before she went down. And it worked out that we could give her stall space, right, at the barn. Okay. And I'm happy to do that for her. But what that meant was that for 2 weeks, I was going to need to trailer my horses back and forth from another facility where we have pasture space. Okay. So you want to guess how many times I rode in the last 2 weeks?
I can imagine the number dwindled, didn't it?
Right. And I can trace my thinking. The first week, I got over a couple times, and then the next week is, oh no, it's just like that's so cold. And I was like, well. Yeah. It's not going to matter anyway because I'm going on vacation next week and I won't be able to ride, so I might as well give them 2 weeks off. And,
gotcha. Yeah.
Right. So the piece about it, my goal of, and it's connected to the things that I'm working on with the horses, the exercise, the strengthening, the skills, all the other stuff that I'm doing. All of that goes by the wayside because there has been a change which has made it just a little less easy.
Yes.
Right? And the other example which always comes to mind is years ago I had an office that was kitty corner, catty corner, I don't know how whatever language, to a coffee shop. Okay? And every morning that I worked, I'd go over and get my coffee and hang out and talk with people. It was great, okay? Mm-hmm. So 3 years later, I moved my office 1 block away.
Okay.
Literally maybe a minute walk, right? Or a minute and a half walk. Mm-hmm. And I never go for coffee. And I end up buying a coffee maker for the office.
You are not nearly as committed to your coffee as I am, I'm just going to say.
Well, I would go once, and buy beans, because they roasted their own beans.
Okay.
But, just that small shift in convenience changed the entire pattern of behavior.
Yes.
And the really cool thing is that, if you're aware of it, you can use that as a tool. You can use that force to help assist you in things that you want to do. Make it easier for you.
So you can set yourself up to have those things work out in your favor.
Exactly. You can set yourself up for success in that way, you know. And if there are things you're trying to get away from, and typically I really encourage people to work towards what I call positively stated goals. And I don't generally talk with people about what they don't want to do.
Okay.
But if you're trying to get away from something, then if you can make it more difficult, you can make it less convenient.
Gotcha.
You can use that to help move things in the right direction. So that's the easiest example of that, or one that people connect to or identify with, is if you would like to snack less.
Okay.
Right? Then what you want to do is you want to go and remove the snacking foods from your house.
Right.
So that in order to snack, it means that you have to go to the store, or you have to do,
Gotcha.
Or you have to go to your neighbor's house, or visit your best friend.
Or just get that, what is that, Uber Eats, and they'll deliver it.
There you go.
Oh, goodness. Right. Goodness. Okay.
So that's the easy component. So let's see, we got SCIE. N is for neurohacks.
Okay.
And it's, this is where the book is really, there's a number of ways in which the book is really well worth getting, but this is one there where they will go in much more detail in the book. There are some pieces of neurohacks which are things that I talk about all the time. So, the idea, we have this idea that our brains are fixed, and and you're from the time the old wisdom was from the time you're 18, your brain cells start dying, and but we know a lot more now, and what we know is that we can do things to increase our flexibility in our thinking. We can do things to increase what they call our neuroplasticity. We can do things to support the development and growth of new brain cells, neurogenesis. So there's that class of stuff, and the most common piece of that, or the most the thing that always rises to the surface in that is this, what they call mindfulness meditation, and different mindfulness practices. And that's really, as best I can tell, is the most focused and efficient way of gaining the benefits that come from these, are targeted to reduce stress and to increase neuroplasticity and increase neurogenesis and all that sort of stuff. So that's an efficient strategy for that. But he goes into all this other stuff, which, is really, really, really interesting. One of them is, a lot of times we think our behavior is guided by our minds. And one of the things that research points to is that really it works the other way too. And the example that he gives is, they've done experiments where they had two groups of people, one who were told to shake their heads up and down for a period of time, and the other group where they had asked to shake their heads side to side.
Okay.
And then they asked them questions afterwards, and the group where they're shaking their heads up and down responded yes more frequently. And the other group responded no more frequently. So a way that you get primed by your body in action.
Interesting.
The other example that he uses is, and this is something that I think most people can identify with. You know, you're kind of grousing about doing something, or maybe you just don't want to ride that day or whatever. But you enter into the action, and by the time you get done, it's like, oh my God, that was great. I'm so glad I got myself to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Right.
Gotcha.
So that's a behavior driving emotion and mental experience in
Okay.
that way. He also talks about, you know, language and how that primes us for different things. You know, he gives the example of a guy who actually set his passwords to guide him in things that he was trying to accomplish.
Really?
So that every day he'd have to, when he was signing in, he'd have to type a password that had some particular meaning.
That's really interesting. That's very cool.
Yeah. So you set your goal and you set what you need to do, and then, you know, you can say, you know, I can jump out of bed at 5. It could be my password.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of, you know, language is very powerful in terms of priming this stuff too. So these are the kinds of things that come out of the neuroscience and stuff that they're studying now, which is really, really interesting. Oh, that was another thing I just remembered, that when you use language, which they did a study about voting behavior and looked at how people describe themselves, and when people said I voted versus people who said I'm a voter, they found that people who identify themselves as a voter vote more frequently and consistently than people who just identify themselves as having done an action.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So these are the kinds of things, as you become aware of them, you can actually play with them to help support you in getting things done.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, so then what's our second C?
The second C is captivating.
Ooh.
And that's about rewards.
Okay.
So it's, you know, it's clear that receiving rewards for your behavior is reinforcing for your behavior, but the rewards have to be things that are in essence meaningful to you and are really rewarding for you, rather than just something that is seen as generally rewarding.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, you need to get something that you really want.
Gotcha. Okay.
And, you know, so, you know, that it's, and that's really, really intimately connected with this idea of goals, because, and the idea of motivations. So, you have to remember this piece, because this is going to lead me to the last thing I want to talk about tonight, which is this really cool study that they did in the UK. But that's, you know, this is connected to motivation and to this idea of things are personal, right?
Okay, sure.
And if it's set up so that the reward, you know, is something that your trainer wants.
Yeah.
Right? Or is rewarding to your trainer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not rewarding to you. It's not captivating to you. Then it's going to be far less supportive of your progress and engaging in the behaviors you need to in order to attain your goals.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. And then E, the last E.
The last E is ingrained.
Ingrained. Ooh.
And that's all about creating new routines.
Gotcha.
Right. So there is an aspect of ritual which is really, really helpful for people and making it routine.
Yes.
You know, that's really helpful. You know, if I do something, you know, here's my Monday routine, my Tuesday routine, my Thursday routine, or that kind of stuff. Having things scheduled in regular ways is one way of doing it. We use this all the time. We teach kids how to drive. They get in the car and you do this, and then you do that, and then you do this, and then you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in reality, at the end of the day, people can drive quite effectively and safely without doing any of that. But it's the idea that when you create those routines, it helps support the new behaviors that you're looking to set in place. And obviously, the new behaviors in our discussion tonight are things that are the steps that are taking you towards your goals.
Gotcha. All right. So, 7 forces for behavioral change come down to the acronym SCIENCE. Step ladder, community, importance, easy, neurohacks, captivating, and ingrained.
Yep.
I like it. See, I'm a good note taker. You didn't know that about me, did you?
No, I didn't. And to reiterate, that's all from the work of a guy named Sean Young from Stanford, and his the book that all of that information's in. If people want to read more about it, is called "Stick With It."
Perfect. I'm going to be looking that one up for sure. For sure. Okay, so, and this is all part of our discussion about goal attainment. So,
Right.
So we talked about the idea of talking to your trainer, having your accountability partner, that idea. We also touched on a little bit kind of critics, but I think I want to talk a little bit more about that, if that's okay with you. So
Sure.
we all have setbacks. We all have the critics and the naysayers and the people that we share with them the goals, and they talk about, they downplay them, or, like we say, they criticize us. And that can kill our motivation, right, for the goals.
Absolutely.
And I'm reminded all the time about the quote from Zig Ziglar. He says, people say motivation doesn't last, and neither does bathing, so that's why we recommend it frequently.
I have not heard that one.
Oh my goodness. Oh, he's got so many great lines. He's got so many good ones. But so what do we do? And really, I think that goes down to the idea of we are the average of the 5 people we hang around the most. So, my idea, if you've got naysayers, drop one of the losers and pick up somebody better. That sounds really judgmental of me, doesn't it? So I've got a goal, right? I'm just going to say this hypothetically, right? So I've got a goal, and I share this with somebody, or I don't, or whatever, or somebody sees me working toward this goal and taking my daily steps, and my breakdowns and all that stuff. And they're a naysayer. They're a critic. They're really killing my motivation. That, of course, this is assuming I'm externally motivated, right, versus internally motivated, which is more what I really am. So if somebody tries to shoot me down, I'm like, yeah, well, you're not in my top 5 anyway.
Right.
But so what do we do? How do we handle that stuff?
Well, you're touching on all the right things. So, one thing I immediately began to think about is, and this is one of the things that I with a lot of my clients, I work on, is it's what I call helping them live their lives from the inside out.
Okay.
So there's a piece of that which is about being internally motivated. It's about making a shift and getting clear for yourself about what your own sense of value is. And the way that I talk about it with people is about building and creating your own internal measuring stick. So that it's not that, those outside of us are unimportant, but at the end of the day, when you look back and say, how do I measure up? You're really asking the question, how do I measure up in comparison to my values, interests, motivations, and so on and so forth? Am I the person that I want to be, rather than saying, am I meeting someone else's expectations?
Gotcha.
And because we are primarily social creatures, and the systems that we grow up in are, designed in many ways to drive conformity. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, society has a need for people to conform to a certain degree, and so that we don't have chaos. But this is one of the primary drives of things like school and even educational programs or riding programs and things. We want people to, comply.
Yes.
Right? And so you're constantly living up to what someone else wants you to do. And in general, there is a maturational process where you are developing over time the sense of yourself as an individual. And as you grow, one choice point along the way is making that shift from being primarily living up to what someone else believes is right for you, and that could be a parent, or that could be, a trainer, or that could be, a mentor or something like that, to where you feel good and solid and comfortable about living up to yourself. Now that's a process, and
sure.
that's a challenge, and within the context of personal and professional development, that's the kind of stuff that would be a core target of the work that I would do with people. Now, within your riding, right, maybe that's a place. I mean, one of the ways to approach it is to really sort of get really clear for yourself on what you're about. And then you have more of an ability to appreciate that different people have different ideas, but that you can kind of hang out with your own program, and that's okay. Now, I have to say that is really, really challenging if you are in a context where there's a lot of people around you with very different ideas.
Yes.
So there were years, just as a personal story, when I had my children, I said, well, I'm not going to be able to ride as much, so I'm going to invest in learning about horses. And I'm going to care for them, and I'm going to do more groundwork, and I'm going to learn about how they learn, and I'm going to do all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to, I bred a mare that I had, and I'm going to learn how to raise a baby, from the ground up, and I'm going to figure it out, and this is my project for the next, 18 years. And I have all my friends. I have a lovely, lovely mare. It's actually the one that I was riding with you, Maggie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, she was, 4 or 5 or 6, and people are going, oh, she's such a lovely mare. You got to get showing her. You got to do this, or you got to do that. I said, well, no.
Right.
I'm just kind of figure out, what I'm figuring out with the time I have to do that. But I had my own farm, and I was surrounded by my family and people that I invited to spend time with me.
Mm-hmm. Or
people that I decided to go and spend time with, which is really different. So for example, now, I'm in where we're riding, I'm in a barn that's filled with primarily hunter-jumper show people.
Okay.
So, a lot of, if I were doing the same thing in that context, that would be more challenging for me to be surrounded by people who were doing something different all the time.
Right.
Right. And when, and I think that there are times that, people it really makes a lot of sense when you can to look for communities of people and situations for you and your horse where you can have more time in those supportive contexts. And that's the role of community that we were talking about earlier, and the importance of relationships and moving things forward. So there's sort of two sides. There's sort of a personal growth and development side,
Okay.
and then there's a practical side.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I like that idea when you mentioned about creating your own measuring stick.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a whole lot. That reminds me a lot of a poem that Ray Hunt used to recite a lot at clinics, called "The Man in the Glass." And anybody who's ridden with Ray, I'm sure, has heard that poem, and it's a great one. And it basically talks about it's the man in the glass, right? Looking that guy in the eye at the end of the day. It's for anybody who hasn't read it or heard it. It's a really great one to look up. I think it was originally published in the early 1930s by a guy named Dale Wimbrough, and Ray used to recite it at a lot of his clinics. It's one of the few poems, maybe one of the only poems that's not like a nursery rhyme or something, that I've actually memorized too. It's a great one.
Cool.
But it talks about the basically having your own personal measuring stick and being true to that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. But okay. So we've got to create that measuring stick. We've got to surround ourselves with the supportive group or community when we can. We talked about the accountability partners, or along with the trainers, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit briefly about the rewards, and I think that's a really great thing. The rewards or the celebrations, right? Getting kind of that bonus for reaching your milestones or your marks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm looking through my list. So we've created our goals. We've created our SMART goals, our well-formed SMART goals, and we do this now every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we have these ideas for attainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're fantastic. And now we've talked about the idea of the process of creating our goals and chunking our goals and doing all that stuff. So we've got all this information, right? And if information was all that we needed, well, hell, Paul, we'd all be millionaires with six-pack abs. I mean, like, we've got all this information. So what's the next step? What do we do? So I'm thinking for our listeners who are tuning into this program, who are listening through this whole thing, now they know what they need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's my first step? What's my first step as somebody that you were talking to about goal setting? What do I need to go do right now?
So, yeah.
Uh-oh.
The reason that
Awkward silence.
Too much dead air. So what the challenge is going back to what you talked about being an individual, right? So different people are going to need to do things right now.
Okay.
So, all of this stuff that we talked about has to get executed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're gonna sit down for a planning session, then right now you've got your phone out and you're texting your trainer and saying, hey, is there a time in the next week that we can sit down and talk about laying all this stuff out?
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? So, that all of this information, none of it is going to have any impact if we don't take action on it. So, which is what you're saying. And then you have to figure out, well, where are you going to start, right? And what are you going to do? So you lay all this stuff out, and in a lot of people, it's going to be actually getting through that process of setting up those goals. And then, you're going to get down to a point where you actually have to do something. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that first step.
Okay.
right? So there's a couple of things that I want to throw out there about making that step steppable.
Okay.
So to speak, okay. So this is a good point to just throw in this study. There's a group of researchers from the University of Birmingham in the UK. And I won't go into a lot of the specifics about what they're doing. Their study's actually accessible online for anybody to look at. But what they were looking at is what things predicted people actually attaining their goals.
Okay.
And
seems like a worthwhile study.
Yeah. And they found a number of different things. And one of the things they found is that when people were given autonomy in choosing their goals, that predicted them putting more effort into working towards their goals, which then predicted them, of course, attaining their goals.
Okay.
And then we'll shift in a minute, but I want to go back to the beginning. So the idea, and this is for those people who are teachers and trainers and are working with people out there, is that it's not that we need to allow our riders to do whatever the hell they want. But if we want people to be successful in attaining their goals, it's really helpful to help them think it through and understand what the choices are, and give them autonomy in kind of making those choices about what they're gonna start with and how they're gonna work through things.
Gotcha.
And that is what they found is that having that, they call it supported autonomy, is predicts their effort and goal attainment regardless of how challenging the goals are.
Okay.
So when things are really challenging or whether they were just relatively easy, that really predicted their goal attainment. The other thing which I found really, really interesting is they identified in their model 3 needs, and I know we've talked about drives and needs before, but they talk about 3 as primary needs that people have. One is for initiation. You and I have talked about that as exploration and play, curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So people need to initiate things. People need to feel mastery, or experience mastery. And then the final one that they talk about is that people need to be connected. So again, you come around to the relationships and how important they are. But you also get around this idea, you hear in their findings, all this stuff we talk about SMART goals kind of resonates in all of this. The idea of having achievable or attainable goals, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that people get to experience, that mastery.
Right.
We talk about the things from Sean Young's work about needing it to be captivating and rewarding, or to have a community, and all these things are things that that sort of resonate through all this. But what they found is that when people were given that supported autonomy, and kind of where do you let them pick and choose and things that are going to be relevant and move them forward, but give them some autonomy in that direction, that they exert more effort, they're more likely to attain their goals, and as a result of that, these important needs are met, and they have a higher or general sense of well-being.
Sure.
So that, this idea is that we, this autonomy is related to our overall sense of well-being, and not just in terms of being able to achieve our goals. So
Gotcha.
what does that mean about, what do we need to do? Well, realistically, if I tell you who's the first thing
right.
I'm already working against your success.
Absolutely. And I guess that kind of, I'm thinking in the long term, we need to have those dreams, those major goals, those aspirational goals that you talked about.
Exactly, yeah.
So we need to know where we would like to go.
So if you know where you want to go, and you've gotten some help in sort of breaking it down, and there's some different dimensions to it. There's, what do I do for myself? What do I do for this? What do I do for that? Well, you may decide that there's 3 or 4 things you can do tomorrow morning.
Sure, right.
Right? And what I would say, rather than to say this is what you should do tomorrow morning, is I say pick one of those and do it.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Right.
And then the only proviso in all of that is that, you want to make sure that you actually have chosen something that you can do. Because that's where people generally get stuck, is that they set the step is just too big.
Yeah, gotcha,
right?
Gotcha.
And if you find yourself, kind of always hitting the snooze button.
Sure, right.
Right.
At least set the alarm clock far enough away you have to get out of bed to turn it off, right?
Right. So you have to set a smaller goal.
Yes.
In terms of moving that forward, and that's and that I know that sort of flirts with the ridiculous, but to get yourself out of bed is achieving a goal that's relevant to getting yourself to the barn. Sure. Right.
Absolutely.
If you're comfortable and efficient in thinking about it as, my goal is to ride 5 days a week, great. But if you're having that problem sort of getting to ride, then you have to break it down into smaller goals for yourself, right?
Something easier.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if it was Tony Robbins or Brian Tracy that I remember reading, and they were talking about never set a goal or never walk away from setting a goal without taking at least one small step toward it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that really, Stephanie Burns also talks about that, is that idea that the thing that predicts your goal attainment is not the level of your desire, it's your ability to take a step towards your goal.
Gotcha.
Right? And then again, you want to get to the place, and this has to do, there's one thing I thought about a number of times as we were talking, is the idea, I talked a lot about how, society sees these challenges as some sort of character defect. Well, the other side of that is about, there's a lot of research now about this idea of self-compassion. The idea about, being kind, in essence, being kind to yourself.
Okay.
Which does not say, it doesn't matter if you, achieve your goals or not. But it says, hey, we all fall down and take a breath and, appreciate what you have done, and now figure out what that next step is going to be.
Gotcha.
Right? A step that you're going to take, rather than spending, hour upon hour beating yourself up, mentally about, how horrible you are and all the other stuff, right?
Okay.
So that certainly is another piece of it, that attitude of self-compassion, attitude of gratitude, along with, a connection to the big dream and the steps, and taking, the care to ultimately get down to a place where you've got something that you can actually do that day, and that you see as being, something that you makes sense to you, it's relevant, it's important to you, and that then you can take that step.
That's awesome. And because we're doing this twice a year, and because the first step that you mentioned to us is taking a look at the big picture, what's brought you closer, what's taken you farther, what's the pluses, what's the minuses, that gives us the opportunity then every 6 months, or however often we do it really, to evaluate that process and see where we're going, see what we've got working for us, what's not working for us. We can drop the things that aren't working. We can do more of the things that are. We can, drop those those losers that are the bad parts of the 5 that make us the average. No, that's bad for me to come back to that. But I think sometimes for some of us that's a part of it. So that's the evaluation of the community, right? That we talked about, that connection.
Right.
And I looking at the notes that I took about the recent study that you talked about, the initiation, the mastery, and the connection, basically it's whatever it is, you've got to decide it, you've got to be able to handle it, and then you have to be able to share it with somebody who's important, whether that's yourself or whether that's the community that you've built.
Right, yourself, your community, in any number of ways, peers,
right.
Trainers, yeah. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So I'm going to be a master horseman, I'm going to be a millionaire, and I'm going to have 6-pack abs just because of listening to all this information, right?
Absolutely. Awesome. You can do that, and I'm going to eat pastries.
Whatever your goals are. I'm not going to judge your goals, Paul. I'm not going to judge them. Because if I were judgy, I would not be a good part of your community.
There you go.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome.
So one thing that clicked, which I hadn't thought about, but is really important about this 6-month thing. So a lot of times we focus on the idea that we have to do it frequently because then we won't do it. Right? Yeah, you sort of lose time, or you get off track. You have too much time to get off track. There's another reason, which is sort of the opposite one. You don't want to do some of the stuff. You don't want to evaluate too frequently, because it's hard, and progress is slow, and achievement is often, attained in what I would describe as a sawtooth curve. So you have, good days and bad days. Sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you.
Gotcha.
And you want to judge yourself, and obviously this is with guidance, so that you're not way off base. But you want to judge yourself, over a period of time, rather than on what happens on any given day.
Gotcha. Sure.
Right. You want to be able to look back and say, wow, there were many days I thought I was on the wrong track. I haven't made any progress and stuff, but look what I can do now that I couldn't do 6 months ago.
Gotcha.
Right. So that's another side of having it be regular, but not being too regular.
Right. Right.
Not so much
too
regular,
frequent.
Too frequent. Yeah. Exactly.
I do think you need a little better analogy for that, because if the bear eats me, all my goals are basically meaningless at that point. And there's no way I will achieve them, unless my goal was to eventually become fertilizer. Goodness, no, but that makes total sense, and I totally get what you mean. If you're checking in too frequently for something that's very long term, it can be really hard to see the micro steps that you've taken, even in spite of setbacks, because those setbacks, depending on what your goal is, could be experience that's going to take you up that ladder.
Right, and this is especially important for things that are really difficult.
Gotcha.
And are different because the learning curve in that, the early stages, things often don't look pretty.
Gotcha.
And don't feel good, right?
Gotcha.
And you really sometimes that struggle is kind of inherent in the process. And you don't want to short circuit that just because it's difficult.
Right. That reminds me of that quote from Edison about the light bulb, and the 10,000 things. He found 10,000 things that didn't work. It wasn't that he made 10,000 mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or whatever the number was, whatever, Yeah. Awesome. This has been great, Paul. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the time to talk about it.
Yeah, I feel like this is so important.
I really enjoy having the time to pull all of these ideas together. One of the things that I love about talking with you is that in any given 2 or 3 month period, I might touch on all of these things, but one thing with one client and another thing with another, or think about a third thing over here.
Mm-hmm.
And just really love the chance to sort of put it all together and talk about it all at once. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you. So our typical wrap up. I'm gonna go into this, and I'm gonna adjust this first question here. If there was one specific thing you'd recommend for riders to focus on as a primary means of setting their goals for their horsemanship, what would that be?
I would say that it's kind of like we talk about your aspirational goals. I would say connect to your dreams. What really lights your fire? That's
awesome. That's perfect. I love that. All right. If you could ride with anybody, past or present, who would it be and why?
Right now, it would be Philippe Carl. Really sort of fascinated. I would just watch him ride, and you look at the culmination of a lifetime of skill development and understanding, and I love the beauty of what he is able to accomplish with his partners, and I would love to just absorb some of that, knowing that it would take me another lifetime to achieve it. I'd love to absorb what I could.
Yes, awesome. And we'll go back to, what's your present personal definition of horsemanship?
I think it's about, I don't know what I said last time. So what I think about now is great horsemanship, or what I aspire to is the seamless integration of two beings, and I wish I could say it was towards a mutual goal, but I know that it's really towards my goal. So in whatever we're doing, that there's this seamless integration or partnership, that there's whether you call it cooperation or whatever. It's about that it's about it being easy.
There you go.
It's probably those moments where it just seems easy. So I tell one last story. I was working with someone today, and they were working with one of my horses, and Maggie, the horse I mentioned earlier, I was working with her, and we were doing something really simple, which was just leading, and at first I had the lead rope over my arm, and then I just wrapped it around her neck, and so she was at liberty the whole time, and we were working on staying in position at my shoulder.
Okay.
Right? And, within 10 minutes, we were there, and if I moved, she moved, and there was also this tremendous sense of being pleased, and a sense that there was no, there was no conflict or force on my part, that there was something about her wanting to be with me in that, and not that it would be her idea to walk around in circles.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But yeah, so that kind of integration of experience, I think, it would be my definition of horsemanship right now.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to steal a question from podcaster Tim Ferriss. If you had a giant billboard, I'm going to adjust it too. If you had a giant billboard to print any message you want on it for the whole world to see in relation to goal setting, what would that message be?
Oh, it's the same. It doesn't matter what I'm talking about. Just be kind.
There you go. Perfect.
Right? And in this case, it would be about being kind to yourself. Being kind to those around you, obviously. But I think in the process of goal setting and all that we talked about, we're so primed to beat the crap out of ourselves.
Yeah.
So I would say be kind, be kind, be kind. And maybe throw in a be patient at the end.
There you go. That's a good one. All right, Paul. Well, it's always great talking to you. How can folks find you if they want to find out more about what you're doing or where you're at, or to get in touch with you? How do they find you?
They can find me a couple different places. I have a website, which is ridingfar.com. They can find me on YouTube, Riding Far LLC. I have a YouTube channel, and I have a weekly video I call Sports Psych in a Minute, which is almost actually it's never been a minute.
I've noticed that, just saying. I'm not judging, by the way, but I've noticed it.
They can always email and call me. There's contact information on the website, and on each post on the YouTube channel, they can reach me that way. I love to talk with people, and happy to get emails. And
Perfect. All right. So you've done this with me before now. So the question of the day. We're going to wrap this up for folks to answer the question of the day, and you get to present that for our audience. What's your question of the day for everybody?
I'm gonna go with that which keeps percolating up in each thing is a question of the day is when it comes to your experience with horses in whatever frame that's been, a lifetime, a day, a year, whatever that is, what truly lights your fire or warms your heart.
I like it. That's awesome. Paul, thank you again so much for joining me. This has been a really awesome discussion about goal setting, and more importantly, I think the goal attainment.
Thank you very much. I really enjoy it, and I'm hoping that everybody takes something away from it. So
I'm sure they will. So, all right, fantastic. Thank you. You know the drill. Hang in for just a moment with me, and I'm going to close us off here. All right, gang, I want to thank you so much for tuning in for episode number 38 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Paul and I your ear. Please remember that if you've missed any of it, you can access the full broadcast through Facebook, YouTube, from iTunes, or by streaming directly from my website by accessing the Talking About Horses page from the Education drop-down menu. Through whatever platform you're listening, please be sure to give us a rating, comment, a review, and a share with your friends. Your word of mouth and support is a fuel for this fire. Thanks, gang.
Hey there, gang. Patrick King here. Every other week, I send out an exclusive email newsletter to help riders reach their goals with their horses. These 5-Bit Friday emails include evaluations of exercises and movements for your horse, rider psychology tips, my personal reviews of books or videos, important thoughts on equitation, anatomy insights, quotes to ponder, lots more. 5-Bit Friday is only available if you subscribe to our email list. If you're interested in receiving these exclusive emails, register today by visiting my website at pkhorsemanship.com/newsletter. Thank you in advance for signing up, and I hope you enjoy and gain lots of value from 5-Bit Friday.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Talking About Horses with Patrick King. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave a review and subscribe. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit pkhorsemanship.com. We'll catch you next time.